The city of Bucha, located near the capital of Ukraine, has become notorious worldwide for the mass killings of civilians during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Bodies with bound hands, close-range gunshot wounds and signs of torture lay scattered in a city on the outskirts of Kiev after Russian soldiers withdrew from the area. Ukrainian authorities accused the departing forces on Sunday of committing war crimes and leaving behind a scene from a horror movie. Bucha, Ukraine, a mother killed by a sniper while walking with her family to fetch a thermos of tea. A woman held as a sex slave, naked except for a fur coat and locked in a potato cellar before being executed. 2 sisters dead in their home, their bodies left slumped on the floor for weeks. Bucha is a landscape of horrors. From the first day of the war, February 24, civilians bore the brunt of the Russian assault on Bucha, a few miles west of Kiev, Ukraine's capital. Russian special forces approaching on foot through the woods shot at cars on the road, and a column of armored vehicles fired on and killed a woman in her garden as they drove into the suburb. But those early cruelties paled in comparison to what came after. As the Russian advance on Kiev stalled in the face of fierce resistance, civilians said, the enemy occupation of Bucha slid into a campaign of terror and revenge. When a defeated and demoralized Russian army finally retreated, it left behind a grim tableau, bodies of dead civilians strewn on streets, in basements or in backyards, many with gunshot wounds to their heads, some with their hands tied behind their backs. The evidence suggests the Russians killed recklessly and sometimes sadistically, in part out of revenge. Unsuspecting civilians were killed carrying out the simplest of daily activities. A retired teacher known as Auntie Luda, short for Lyudmila, was shot mid-morning on March 5 as she opened her front door on a small side street. Her body lay twisted, half inside the door, more than a month later. Roman Havrilyuk, 43, a welder, and his brother Serhiy Dukly, 46, sent the rest of their family out of Bucha as the violence intensified, but both insisted on staying behind. They were found dead in their yard. My uncle stayed for the dog, and my father stayed for the house, Mr. Havrilyuk's son, Nazar, said. An unknown man also lay dead nearby, and the family's 2 dogs were riddled with bullets. They were not able to defeat our army, so they killed ordinary people, said Nazar, 17. Troops started searching homes and ordered residents not to go outside. They were going yard by yard, said Valery Yurchenko, 42, a mechanic living near the river. A Russian commander warned him not to go out on the street. We have orders to shoot, the commander said. The soldiers confiscated cell phones and computers. Some were polite but still ordered families to leave their homes near the bases and go to a nearby kindergarten. They handed me my walking stick, said Tatiana Masinovets, 65, who was among those told to leave. The soldiers turned her house into a pit, using one room as a toilet. They stole everything, she added. As more troops arrived, they drove their armored vehicles straight into people's gardens, crushing metal gates and fences and parking with their guns trained on the street. Volodymyr Shepitko, 66, fled with his wife when a Russian armored vehicle barreled through their back fence. They took shelter in a basement of school number 3. Russian soldiers were also using the school and the residential complex behind it for mortar positions. Mr. Shepitko, a retired water engineer, slipped back to fetch some food from the house and found Russian soldiers living there. He described them as kontraktniki, contract soldiers, men who are often experienced fighters but notorious for abuses and acting with impunity. They had parked their armored vehicles across the street and were sleeping and heating water in the house, Mr. Shepitko said. The soldiers made a sarcastic comment about Ukrainian fascists, testing his loyalty. I thought I would be shot, he said, and I kept silent. They demanded his cell phone but his dog barked so furiously at them that they backed off and let him go. It was only when he returned after the Russians pulled out of Kiev that Mr. Shepitko discovered just how far the Russian soldiers had gone. His house had been ransacked, filled with rubbish and beer bottles. Then, in a cellar under the garden shed, his nephew discovered the body of a woman. Slumped sitting down, bare legs akimbo, she wore a fur coat and nothing else. She had been shot in the head, and he found 2 bullet casings on the ground. When the police pulled her out and conducted a search, they found torn condom wrappers and 1 used condom upstairs in the house. The abuse of the woman was one case of many, said Ukraine's official ombudswoman for human rights, journalist. She said she had recorded horrific cases of sexual violence by Russian troops in Bucha and other places, including one in which a group of women and girls were kept in a basement of a house for 25 days. 9 of them are now pregnant, she said. She speculated that the violence came out of revenge for the Ukrainian resistance, but also that the Russian soldiers used sexual violence as a weapon of war against Ukrainian women. A walk to fetch water turns deadly. The city had been without electricity, running water, gas or internet since early March, and thousands of residents, still in their homes, were living in freezing temperatures, sleeping in their clothes, under layers of blankets. 6 people in a home for seniors perished from hunger, cemetery workers who collected the bodies in early April said. The lobby was icy cold, and 4 of the dead had congregated in a sunroom across the garden. At the house next door, the same workers had cut down a woman who had hung herself from a branch. A walk to fetch water turns deadly. The city had been without electricity, running water, gas or internet since early March, and thousands of residents, still in their homes, were living in freezing temperatures, sleeping in their clothes, under layers of blankets. 6 people in a home for seniors perished from hunger, cemetery workers who collected the bodies in early April said. The lobby was icy cold, and 4 of the dead had congregated in a sunroom across the garden. At the house next door, the same workers had cut down a woman who had hung herself from a branch. In the Brovarsky district, a Russian occupier broke into the house, shot the owner, killed the dog, and then raped his 33-year-old wife 3 times, threatening her and her 4-year-old child with weapons. "I shot your husband because he is a Nazi," a 20-year-old Russian soldier said, pointing a gun to her head. Also resonant was the story from Mariupol, where the Russian military raped a woman in front of her 6-year-old son. The woman died from her injuries, the child turned gray. A strand of gray hair appeared on his head after received trauma. According to reports, Ukrainian soldiers found the bodies of at least 14 civilians, including women and children, in a well in Bucha. The well was located in the courtyard of a private house in the city. It is reported that the bodies were dumped into a well by Russian troops occupying the city.